title is called Richard Branson, Entrepreneur, Visionary, Entertainer, and Billionaire. And Alex is going to talk about him. Alex just completed his Competent Communicator. He's now starting on the Speaking to Inform manual. And during the next 5 speeches, Alex is going to talk about technology, marketing, famous people, and stories from bestsellers. Please help me welcome Alex.
Thank you. So indeed, I've finished the Competent Communicator manual, and I'm really excited to start on the Speaking to Inform one because it gives me the green light to talk about stuff that doesn't have to be promotional or anything else, just speaking to inform about stuff that I find interesting. Somebody that I find really interesting is Richard Branson, and I particularly find interesting his accomplishments in life, not only because he's made a bunch of money, but also because he's made products and services that are super awesome to enjoy, like the Virgin America flights that I take very often from Seattle to San Francisco. So let's start off with a few numbers about Richard to kind of set the tone. He's about 60 years old right now, and he's worth $2.5 billion. He's the chairman of the Virgin Group, which is the conglomerate that runs about 400 companies that are worldwide right now, and they span industries from air travel and cell phones and mobile to entertainment and resorts in Africa where people can go and enjoy safaris. So very, very diverse sphere of businesses. In 1968, Richard was 16 years old, and he was actually dyslexic. This is an interesting factor about his life. So he kind of struggled in school. He wasn't, he didn't excel in school. He didn't have rich parents. He actually struggled in school, and he found it a little bit difficult to pay attention to things that didn't really matter to him. So instead, though, he was great with people. He had great approach with people. And in 1968, he was 16 years old. He started his first business, which is called Student. It was a publication, student magazine. So just a couple years later, in 1970, he started selling records. Back in those days, we didn't have downloads, we didn't have CDs, and we didn't have torrents. So people relied on records, which he actually went abroad to come and pick up, maybe in France, maybe different countries, and bring them to England, and he sold them out of the trunk of his car. Eventually, that evolved into a mail-order business, kind of like the early versions of Netflix. And it became so popular that just a year later, they opened a store on Oxford Street. Oxford Street is one of the main drags in London. And eventually, this becomes the Virgin Megastore, the large operation. But this is where they started. Also, interestingly, they started a record studio, which signed up one of the early and now very famous artists like Mike Oldfield with one of his first albums called Tubular Bells. Virgin Records sang him, and that's who he released this recording with. And they also signed with untraditional bands like Sex Pistols. In 1984, which is about 16 years later, the Virgin Records business has become so successful that it enables Richard Branson to go into a completely different business, into air travel. So this is when he starts Virgin Atlantic to take people to all kinds of different places. And British Airways, which was the incumbent airline at the time in the UK, didn't particularly like the fact that there was a brand and upcoming and sexy company like Virgin, so they started what Richard Branson refers to as the dirty tricks campaign. So much so that they almost undermined the operations of the new company, and he actually got fed up with it, and he took him to court. Interestingly enough, he won the case, and the judge awarded him a $500,000 settlement, which he actually shared with his stuff. So he didn't keep it, he just said, we'll just go and have a party and share it with his stuff. So this is 16 years after he started his first business. He goes into a completely different direction. And then he has these two businesses, records and recording artists, and then air travel. But at one point, he has to make a tough decision, and he decides to sell one of his companies, which is the Virgin label, to an American company called EMI for $1 billion US, in order to save the operations of the air travel company. I found that really interesting. I didn't know about this, and in TED Talks, the conference in Southern California, he shares that story. He said this was a really difficult decision to make because this is the largest label at the time, and because it's so successful, and because it has such a strong brand identity. But looking back, he says this is one of actually the smartest decisions he's ever made because it enabled him to grow all the other businesses and actually survive and make sure they prosper going forward. Virgin America came to the US maybe a couple of years ago. It actually enabled me. This is a personal story. I only came here to do a project at Microsoft, and I was going back to San Francisco. Virgin America started flights from San Francisco to from Seattle to San Francisco and back for $50 each way, which is about the cab fare from Redmond to the airport. So this was a great experience, and I've used them ever since. And they've opened and lowered the prices nationwide. They have $50 to $60 flight from Seattle to San Francisco. They have a $99 flight from SFO to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, for instance. So this brings the prices of all the other companies, and this doesn't come at the expense of any quality of service. This is a great experience. Actually, it comes from the synergies and the efficiencies of the business through booking tickets online and so forth. And they have one of the state-of-the-art systems for booking tickets online. Also, they have a state-of-the-art system in the in-flight entertainment that not only enables you to see a bunch of movies and recent shows and so forth, and real-time satellite TV, but also enables you to mix your drinks on the panel in front of you and pay with credit card, which not all of the airlines offer you today. Most of the domestic U.S. airlines, you have to carry cash, and very often you don't. So if you say, "Oh, I ran out of cash," you can't pay for your drinks. So I found that always a little strange, but Virgin America does. So the next frontier is actually space. So check this out. He's going to offer space travel for both recreational and scientific purposes. And the ticket to that trip is $200,000. Now, you have to come up with a 10% deposit in case you get cold feet, and then you say, "I really don't feel like traveling to space today." But I thought it was a great idea at the time. So, $200,000 gives you a ticket to this thing, and you get to share this with 8 other people, and there's 2 pilots controlling the flight. And just a couple of months ago, he announced the other frontier, and this is the latest addition to the Virgin fleet. This is a submarine called the Necker Nymph, which is going to be diving off of Necker Island, which is where he lives, in the British Virgin Islands. And this experience comes at a slightly cheaper price, slightly, because it's yours for $25,000 per week, but only after you spend $88,000 for a week on his catamaran off of Necker Island. This thing is actually harder to build than the spaceship because the materials used for the Necker Nymph are supposed to sustain harder and higher pressures in the ocean in 130 feet depth compared to the spaceship. I found that really interesting. So this is where the Necker Island is, and this is actually owned entirely by Richard Branson. He bought it in 1978 for about 175,000 British pounds. The original vision was that he's going to host rock bands and people who signed up to work with Virgin Records. And eventually, when he saw that the British government made him build a resort, this was actually part of the sales contract, real estate transaction, that he's going to build a resort in the next 5 years. And this is why the transaction went through and they let him purchase it. Interestingly, he spent $10 million on a 10-bedroom property, which is about $1 million per bedroom. And it's yours for $47,000 a week. However, on the bright side, it's available for 28 people at a time, so the price comes down to about $230 if you can find another 27 people to share that experience.